All right, today we're going to read the last 2 chapters of our book. We have flown through this book. Chapter 29. Before Luke had a chance to move, Jen's dad had picked him up and thrust him into the closet. "There's a secret door at the back," he hissed. "Use it." Luke groped blindly, fighting through what he felt like piles of hair. Behind him, he could hear Jen's dad yelling, "I'm coming! I'm coming! That's a $12,000 door. If you break it down, you're going to pay." Then Luke heard the computer making its beep, 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 and Jen's dad muttering, "Fine time to discover efficiency. Come on, connect." He's talking about, he thought they were backlogged. What does it mean? Had lots of things that they were tracking down, and how quickly they came after Luke got onto the computer. The pounding at the door grew louder, and a gruff voice yelled out, "You have 3 seconds, George." Luke dug deeper into the closet. He couldn't even find the back wall, let alone any secret door. And then he heard a splintering sound from the front of the house. Seconds later, there were stomping footsteps in the computer room. "What's the meaning of this?" It was Jen's dad's voice coming from the hall, full of outrage. If he hadn't witnessed it himself, Luke never would have guessed that Jen's dad had been crying only moments before. He sounded so forceful, too assured, too confident that he was right, and everyone who opposed him was wrong. The stomping stopped. From deep inside the closet, Luke heard someone snicker. "Got you with your pants down, huh, George?" They thought he was in the bathroom. Yes, very funny," Jen's father replied, not sounding the least bit amused. There was a sound that could have been a zipper being zipped. Has it come to this? A man can't even go to the bathroom without his door being broken down by a bunch of morons with power complexes? And you will pay for that door, I assure you. If Luke had been one of the population police, Jen's dad would have scared him to pieces. Luke would have backed out muttering, I'm sorry. He never would have believed that Jen's dad was hiding a 3rd child. Hopefully, Luke paused in his burrowing into the Talbots' closet. But the voice that answered Jen's father carried only the slightest edge of doubt. "Come off it, George. You know we're entitled to search and seizure. We have reports of that computer being used for illegal purposes just half an hour ago." "You're even bigger fools than I thought," Jen's dad answered. "Don't any of you read your memos? I reported to Central Command," that's headquarters, "this morning that I was going to continue my sting operation in the illegal chat rooms. See, I wrote, 'Where's Jen?' and 'Hello, is anyone there?' which is what some lost, confused 3rd child who missed the rally might write. Are you so low-ranking that you don't know I was pretending to be the guerrilla leader Jen all along? Did you miss the commendation ceremony where I was awarded for the disposal of 40 illegals?" Luke wondered that Jen's dad could say her name without his voice giving him away. If Luke didn't know Jen, hadn't known her, he corrected himself with a wince. If he didn't know how much she trusted her father, he would have been certain that Jen's father had double-crossed her. As it was, his head swam with the fear that Jen's father might betray him. How could he trust anyone who spoke so coldly of the disposal of 3rd children? Luke struggled on through the closet, reaching a stack of blankets at the back. Finally, he touched a wall, but everything he felt was smooth. Jen's father said there was a door. There had to be a door. The voices from outside the closet were muffled now. "See, the memo. I'm sure it's on your desk back at the office, with all the paperwork you never read." Jen's dad raised his voice so Luke could hear. "Or can you even read?" The population police officer ignored the insult. "Show us on the computer." Very well. Luke prayed that Jen's dad had something to show them. He could not find the door, though he ran his fingers along the wall again and again. His heart was beating so loudly, he was sure the population police could hear him. All he could hear of the population police and Jen's father's was mutterings. Then one officer's voice rang out. "You're lying, George. We're going to search." "Just because of a computer malfunction? Fine, it's not my problem." Luke was stunned by the indifference in Jen's father's voice. "But when you don't find anything And you won't. You know I'm entitled to an illegal search and seizure benefits granted to barons, and I will press charges. So what he's saying is, if the population police search a house and do damage, and they don't find any illegals, then the barons can sue them. I'm entitled to the illegal search and seizure benefits granted to barons, and I will press charges. Should I use the extra money on caviar or champagne? Ah, George, you wouldn't really sue. You don't think so? Then go ahead. Start here. Suddenly, the closet was flooded with light. Luke stifled a gasp. How could Jen's father have flung open the door of the very place Luke was hiding? Desperately, Luke yanked a blanket over his head. None of the population police answered Jen's father, but the pattern of shadows that fell on Luke's blanket made him think the population police were standing right in the doorway of the closet. He heard hangers scraping against a metal bar, and then the population police walked away. Confused and terrified, Luke remained huddled under a blanket. He could hear muffled footfalls elsewhere in the house, and was certain they would be returning to the computer room any minute. Before they killed him, he hoped they would let him go back to his parents and tell them how much he loved them. He could apologize to Matthew and Mark, too, for not appreciating the checkers and the card games they played with him when he knew they would rather be outside. And probably he should apologize to his parents for disobeying and coming to Jen's house in the first place. Except, even scared to death of being found, he couldn't scrape up any full regret for that. Wasn't mean? He was not sorry he met Jen. That being that scared of the population police, he was still very, very glad and very happy he met Jen. Anyway, it wasn't likely that they would let him see his parents before they killed him. That he would have to protect his parents, refuse to even reveal who they were. Luke's mind was still racing with frantic plans when he heard someone coming back to the computer room. There was only one set of footsteps, so he dared to hope. You could have swept up the glass on your way out. It was Jen's dad. Luke strained to hear an answer, but none came. Were the population police gone? Luke kept his head down. He heard Jen's dad wading into the closet. Then he pulled the blanket off Luke and clamped his hand over Luke's mouth. Luke started to struggle until he read the words on the paper Jen's dad held in front of his face. They're gone. You're safe, but don't talk. Luke relaxed and nodded to show he would obey. Jen's dad released him, flipped the paper over, and began writing furiously. House bugged now. Luke gave Jen's dad a puzzled look. He started to say, but remembered and stopped. He took the pen from Jen's dad and wrote, bugged. Ants? Roaches? Jen's dad shook his head frantically. Bugs. Little listening devices, meaning mini microphones. Population police can hear everything. That's why I can't talk. They do this when a bust, meaning what they just did at the house, is unsuccessful. Even left one bug on me. Jen's dad turned around and pointed, and Luke saw a small disc sticking to the back of his collar. Luke frowned and wrote on the paper, why not take off? Jen's dad shook his head. Safer this way. As long as they think they hear everything, they won't come back. Jen's dad pointed to the hairy lumps on the hangers behind him. Bribed them. What does that mean? I think I explained that earlier. Bribe is when you give someone something to keep a secret. So he bribed them with fur coats. Very rare, very valuable. Luke looked at the coats. There did seem to be a lot fewer of them now. Were they animal skins? Why would anyone want such a thing? He couldn't ask, though, because Jen's dad was already scribbling more. Just bought time. My goose, meaning his job, meaning his, he would be found out by the population police, is probably cooked now. I didn't file that memo, and they'll find out. Luke reached for a pen. What will they do to you? Jen's dad shook his head. Don't know, he wrote. I've survived this kind of thing before, but everything's chancy now. The fact that they got here so fast means they have it in for me. Weakly, Luke leaned his head back against the closet wall. That reminded him of his frantic search along the surface. He reached for the paper and wrote, "Where's the door?" Jen's dad pulled out a new sheet of paper, shaking his head. He wrote, "There isn't one. Just wanted you to get back to the closet." Luke buried his face in his hands. Jen's dad was a good liar. There was no doubt about that. How could Luke trust him? Luke raised his head and watched as Jen's dad scribbled something else on the paper. His expression was full of concern, and Luke knew somehow that he was trustworthy. He easily could have turned Luke in and gotten praise and another award. Commendation means award ceremony. But how confusing to never know when someone was lying. Jen's dad turned the paper to face Luke. It said, "So, you want a fake ID or not?" Luke gulped. After a minute, he wrote back, "Am I safe if I don't?" Jen's dad seemed to be weighing the question. He narrowed his eyes and wrote, "Probably. They're after me now, not you. If they really thought there was an illegal here, they wouldn't have taken the bribe, or would take it and you too. But I would advise you, get ID." Luke wrote back, "Can't I wait? Think about it for a while?" That was what Luke wanted, or not even to think, but to hide from thinking for a while. He wanted to remember Jen, to grieve for her by himself. He didn't want to have to think about what parts of the population law were good and what parts were bad, or why his family didn't have more money. He didn't want to have to figure out Jen's dad and other people like him who could pretend to be so many different things. He didn't want to have to decide something now that could change the rest of his life. But Jen's dad had written back, "Don't know. Maybe a case of now or never." Luke scrawled, "Why?" Jen's dad wrote for a long time. Then he turned the paper to Luke. It said, "I have power now," meaning he still has his job. "Tomorrow, probably. Next week? Question marks. Next year? Question marks. Can't tell with our government. Favored lackey one day, persona non grata the next," meaning favored one day and being a loser the next day. Never know. No guarantees. Luke stared at the paper until the words blurred together. He had to decide now. He thought about reading and daydreaming in the attic the rest of his life. His parents were kind to him, even if they weren't around much. And as much as Matthew and Mark had always teased him, he was pretty sure they would take care of him if his parents couldn't someday. His life was very limited. He understood that now more than ever. But he was used to it. It was safe. He could make himself be happy. Except, Luke remembered how bored he felt before meeting Jen. How desperate he had been to do something, anything, besides read and daydream. He had been so desperate that he risked his life for the chance of meeting another third child. Did he want to spend the rest of his life feeling that desperate? Did he want to just waste it? But even if he got a fake ID, what would he do? The answer was there instantly, as if he had known all along. And his brain was just waiting for him to come looking. He could do something to help other third children come out of hiding. Not with another big dramatic rally like Jen had tried, or by finding fake IDs the way Jen's dad did. Maybe there was something smaller and slower he could do. Studying ways to grow more food so no one would go hungry, no matter how many kids people had. Or changing the government so that farmers were allowed to raise pigs and use hydroponics, and ordinary people, not just barons, could have better lives. Or figuring out ways for people to live in outer space so they wouldn't be too crowded on Earth and chop down beautiful woods just for houses. He didn't know exactly how he could do those things or even what the right thing to do was, but he wanted to do something. He remembered what he had told Jen the last time he had seen her. People like you change history. People like me, we just let things happen to us. And he believed it. That was how his family had always lived. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe he could succeed where Jen had failed precisely because he wasn't a baron. Because he didn't have her sense that the world owed him everything. He could be more patient, more cautious, more practical. But he'd never be able to do anything staying in hiding. He bit his lip. His hand shook as he wrote his answer. I want a fake ID, please. Chapter 30. Lee Grant. Now here's where I want to talk with you about fake IDs again. Remember I told you that you become a new person, and you have a new name, and you have a new family, and you have a new place that you live. And so Lee Grant is now who Luke is going to become. So I want you to make sure that when you see Lee Grant, that's still Luke, but that's him with his fake identity. Okay? Lee Grant settled into the car that would take him away from the farm where he found refuge. After running away from home, so here's the story as to how Lee Grant came to Luke's house, because they have to have a backstory. Lee Grant settled into the car that would take him away from the farm where he found refuge. After running away from home, he had gotten lost. He certainly never intended to end up here. He surveyed the dusty barnyard in front of him, the ugly ruts of dried mud where tractors and trucks had left their tracks. He stared at the ramshackled barn and the peeling paint on the weathered house, sights that should have been entirely foreign to him, but weren't. So now he's having to do his pretending. So he's pretending. Luke is now pretending to be Lee, and look, you got to keep at least the same letter in his name. So he's now pretending to live like this guy, this name that he has now, Lee Grant. And so there had to be a reason that he was at Luke's house, because he was a Baron. Why would Baron be at this with these people? And so their story was that he ran away from his house and got lost and came to them for help, Luke's parents for help. Luke gulped, unable to keep thinking in his new identity quite yet. It was too soon, too hard, when his shoulders still felt the warmth of Mother's last tug. He looked down at his hands clenched together in his lap, and they already seemed like someone else's against the background of his crisp, new trousers. Remember, he didn't get anything new. All his clothes were hand-me-downs. Crisp, new trousers. No more ragged blue jeans and hand-me-down flannel shirts for him. He had a whole suitcase in the trunk full of the same kind of fancy, barren clothes he laughed at all those months ago. He didn't care about the clothes, but he wished they would let him keep his name at least. Yet Jen's father had been proud he had gotten to keep the same initials. Oh, let's look back. Yeah, Luke. Yeah, you're right. A rush job like this, it's a wonder you're not stuck with Alfonso Exerces, meaning like some Spanish name or some other ethnic name. He at least got a name that fit his nationality. He bragged in the letter he dropped off the night before, pretending he was coming to ask Luke's parents to cut back the willow tree that draped over into the Talbots' land. Now remember, he still has that microphone on him, and so he has to, Jen's dad has to have reasons for coming to visit them. And so he made up the excuse that he needed to talk to Luke's parents because a tree was draping over into his yard. The real Lee Grant was a Baron. This is who the real Lee Grant was. He had died in a skiing accident just the night before. His parents wanted nothing to do with Luke. Too painful. A lot of times on a fake ID you went and lived with that parent, but this family doesn't want that to happen. Too painful, Jen's father had explained, but they had agreed to donate their son's name and identity card the way people had once donated hearts and kidneys. Some secret group that helped third children had arranged it. The group had also agreed to pay for Luke to go to a private school. So instead of going to live with them, he's going to a private school. Now, private school sometimes has you live there year-round, and you live and you eat and you sleep and you live there. The group has also agreed for Luke to go to a private school as a boarder year-round. Supposedly, he was transferring in during the middle of a term as punishment for running away. He read about such places in the old books in the attic. It seemed a strange way to live without family, but he was just as glad not to have to pretend to love another set of parents. Now Luke looked back at his family's porch, where Mother and Dad and Matthew and Mark were standing and already waving. Dad and Matthew looked gruff, and Mark merely looked serious. Strange enough for him, but tears were streaming down Mother's face. She cried, too, the night Luke told his parents everything. He started with his first visit to Jen's house, and Mother had immediately scolded, "Oh, Luke, how could you? The danger. I know you're lonely, but honey, promise us never again." "That's not all," Luke said. He told the rest of the story without looking at her, until he reached the end and his decision to get a fake ID. Then the sound of her sobbing made it impossible to avoid looking. She was red-eyed, devastated. "Luke, no, you can't," she gasped. "Don't you know how we would miss you?" "But Mother, I don't want to go," Luke said. "It's just, I have to. I can't spend the rest of my life hiding in the attic. What will happen when you and Dad can't take care of me anymore?" "Matthew or Mark will," she replied. "I don't want to be a burden on them. I want to do something with my life. Figure out ways to help other third kids. All things he thought of sounded too childish to explain. In the face of Mother's sobbing, so he finished weakly, "Make a difference in the world." "I'm not saying you can never do that," she answered, "but that's years away. We'll figure out some way to get a fake ID for you when you're grown up somehow." She turned to Luke's father. "Tell him, Harlan." Dad grieved heavily. The boy's right. He needs to go now, if he can. Luke could tell his father's voice came out painfully, but they still stabbed at him. Maybe part of him had been secretly hoping his parents would forbid him to go, would lock him in the attic and keep him as their little boy forever. He checked around some, quiet-like, to see if anyone's heard of a third child getting to live a normal life. "Around here they can't," Dad said. "As far as I can tell, he's not going to get another chance." Luke turned back to his mother because it was too hard to look at Dad while he was saying that. But the pain twisting Mother's face was worse. "Then I guess we don't have a choice," she murmured. That had been 2 days ago, and ever since then she had called in sick to work and stayed home, spending every second with Luke. They played board games and cards, but she would interrupt every move with, "Do you remember?" or "I remember," the coups he made as a baby, his first steps, his delight in discovering dirt the spring he was 2, the first time he hoed a straight row, the zucchini he had grown as long as his arm, the bedtime stories and tucking ins. She was filling him up with memories he knew, for the times when he would have no one to talk to about his childhood. But it was hard to listen. He wished they could just move their Monopoly pieces and pretend the time wasn't ticking away. But all too soon, this morning had come, and Jen's dad had pulled up in his fancy car and sprang out to shake hands with Luke's parents. "Mr. Garner, Miss Garner, thank you very much for reporting this boy's arrival immediately." So what he's saying is that the Garners called and said Lee Grant was at their house and that he was safe. "Mr. Garner, Mrs. Garner, thank you so much for reporting this boy's arrival immediately. From what I hear, the Grants were worried sick." He turned to Luke. "Young man, what you did was irresponsible and reckless. The only smart thing you did was remember to take your ID card. I guess you must have heard that the population police shoot first and ask questions later." He clapped Luke on the back and slid his hand down to slip something into Luke's pocket. Luke reached down to touch the stiff edge of an ID card. His ID card. "Do we have to start pretending already?" Luke's mother whispered, the tears beginning in her eyes. Jen's dad was shaking his head sternly yes, and patting his chest, as if looking for something in a hidden pocket. "Bugged," he mouthed. When Luke's parents nodded to show they understood, he stopped patting and pulled out an official-looking paper. "Ah, here they are. Your travel papers. Your parents are sending you to HiddenCh School for Boys. And if you don't shape up," Jen's dad gave him a stern look that somehow also conveyed sympathy. Mother cleared her throat. "Would it be all right if we gave him a goodbye hug?" we've gotten kind of fond of him in the time that he's been here." Jen's father nodded, and then both Luke's parents held him tight and released him. "Be a good boy now, you hear?" Mother said. Luke could tell she was trying to make it jokey, the way she might talk to some other mother's runaway son. But for the life of him, he couldn't come back with a joking response. He only nodded, blinking hard. Then he stumbled to the car and tried to be Lee. Jen's dad circled the car and slid into the driver's side. He started the car and pulled out. "You're just lucky you're getting a highly paid chauffeur," he said. "If I weren't a personal friend of your father's cousin—" Luke wasn't sure if there was a hidden message in the words, or if Jen's dad was just talking for the sake of the bug. He decided he couldn't analyze it yet. He peered back at his frantically waving family until they were out of sight. Soon the car was passing the other side of the barn and the field beyond, views Luke had never seen, though he lived his entire life within 100 feet of them. In spite of the fear gnawing in his stomach and the anguish of missing his family already, he felt a thrill of excitement. There was so much to see, he would have to tell Jen. Jen. The grief he had been avoiding for days welled over him again. "But I'm doing this for you too, Jen," he whispered, too softly for Jen's dad or the bug to hear over the car's hum. "Someday, when we're all free, all the third children, I will tell everyone about you. They'll erect statues to you and name holidays after you." It wasn't much, but it made him feel better a little. Luke stared back at his family farm as long as he could. He could see just the roof of Jen's house beyond the sparse line of trees, and then in no time at all, it seemed, everything familiar disappeared over the horizon. Lee Grant turned around to see what lay ahead. Now, I told you, this is a book that's the book number 1 in a series called The Shadow Children. Let me see if I can find maybe a list of where they are. Hang with me for a minute. No, they're in another one. But this is book number 1. Let me see if the back has anything. No, it still has that. But this is number 1, and I think there's 8 books, if I'm not mistaken. And this, now, book 2 is called, oh, shoot. I have it. I may have to show you those books in another video. But anyway, this is book 1. If you liked this series and you now know the new character, no, he's not a new character, but you know Luke is now Lee Grant. The rest of the series is going to be about his story. So, this is book 1. The series is called Shadow Children. So if you want this for Christmas, this would be a great thing to ask for Christmas. That you want the Shadow Children series, then you can get the rest of the books and your own copy of this one from Amazon or probably Barnes & Noble or Half Price Books. But it is the first in a series of 8 that's called, and each book is called Among the. So one book, this is called Among the Hidden. Then the next book is Among the, and then it has something else. Each one of the books starts off with the title Among the. And so, just wanted to let you know that this is the first book in a series of 8 called The Shadow Children.